We are live.
All right. Well, thank you for your patience, and thank you, Lauren. I'm pulling it up myself here, and I wanted to just take a moment to thank you, Lauren, for emceeing and driving the presentation today, and Elisa for handling some of the links in the chat. Um, I am a screen reader user, so I'm going to go ahead and mute my notifications, which tells me everything from when folks raise their hand to leave a meeting to join the meeting to chats and everything else. And it becomes very verbose uh, and it's hard to follow. But what I've done is I've built some times in the presentation where I'm going to pause and reactivate my notifications, and I'll take a look at the chat, and uh, that'll be a good opportunity for you to unmute yourself as well and ask questions and things like that. And I'll review raised hands and things like that as well. So, um, one of the things we all know is that, access to the digital interfaces and things we use every day has become more and more important as technology progresses, as we do things. And I pulled some stats from a couple of different academic papers and things like that I've read um, about, the digital divide, right? And how, 1 in 4 adults are using telehealth services. 75 to 85% of people are in schools. Students in schools are using some form of digital textbooks in the K through 12 system, at least for one of their classes. And job applications now require some sort of technology skills, whether it's just entering your payroll and things like that. Well, if you use assistive technology to access those digital interfaces, then you've got to have really good assistive technology skills, right? Um, I would say that if a student is using, for example, speech recognition technology like Dragon to produce their schoolwork, or if they're using Zoom text, JAWS, things like that, they are, by the time they reach college, they are ahead of many, many other people in the general population who don't use those technologies in terms of how they use their computer or how they use their mobile phones and things like that. They have very advanced skills. And people without those skills, in the assistive technology, who have disabilities, they're falling further and further behind, right? Uh, Assistive technology vendors, and it seems like in mainstream technologies, we're trying to adapt to address these concerns, right? Um, and just borrowed a phrase, we've really gone from really requiring accessibility to be built in to what can we do on the assistive technology side to make things easier uh, for for the end user, so that they don't have to be that technology expert just to complete a job application or fill out a time card at work and things like that. So I just grabbed 3 different topics that I've been thinking about, and I just wanted to kind of run through them and just show you how I think that things are changing and evolving over time. The first is how screen readers are interpreting web pages beyond just their code. Uh, Second is how technology is used to recognize speech, right? And convert it into text, either through dictation or through producing documents and producing, controlling the computer. And then the third is the difference between providing alt text to the end user versus recognizing images using built-in technologies. And this really just kind of drives home my point. If you're a screen reader user on a website, uh, you've got to know a lot of different commands. You got to know, links commands, headings commands, different commands for interacting with and filling out forms. Uh, there's different commands for using tables, frames. place markers, bookmarks, divisions, other things related to ARIA. But you also just need to know your basic reading commands, right? Like reading by word, sentence, paragraph, line. If you've ever had any kind of interaction with a screen reader or even a text to speech program that might be used by a person with another type of reading disability, if you just turn it on and press play, the comprehension level is very, very, very poor, right? So you got to know all these different commands to interact with the web page. And that assumes, right, that a designer, a developer, or your content contributors on your websites have actually taken the time to design with accessibility in mind, right? Have actually created those elements that technology like a screen reader can use. Well, here's kind of the flip side to that coin. You look at the web content accessibility guidelines and the understanding document, which is an awesome document, right? But this is slide 8, Lauren. This is kind of what it says, right? So information, structure, and relationships are conveyed through text if they're available in any. What does that actually mean, right? Like, most of the time, if you're a web contributor, especially, it means use headings, right? WebAIM survey says 70% of screen reader users, for example, use headings to give their to navigate web pages, to give them structure and can navigate around. Well, screen reader vendors realize that that's a lot for a contributor to understand, and even if they are applied, they may not be applied consistently between different websites, for example, right? So you go to the Amazon website and then you go to your school's website. The structure of that page, the elements that you use to navigate are going to be different. So every time a user visits a new web page, they have to relearn how to navigate that page, right? It can be it's a time consuming process. Uh, This is one example, and it's the example that I've got readily at hand, where we call it, where the Freedom Scientific, the vendor of and makers of JAWS screen reader on Windows, has a feature called Smart Glance, right? And the way it handles it is ranks your content based on reverse order. So if you've got an item that only appears once on the page, it looks at the background colors, it looks at the foreground colors, it looks at any font changes, and sort of decides on its own what elements or what sections of the web page are the most relevant to you. And I've found this to be most helpful on pages that are sort of like your news sites, or sites that contain a lot of different content that is brought in from third parties, for example, where it may not be marked up with headings directly. And a real good example for was the Washington Post, right? Their website uh, part. Um, their website has definitely has a structure to it their with a heading structure. But you know what those headings don't include? Any of the main articles on the web page, right? So what the Smart Glance feature does is it fills those in and identifies each one of those as actual headings on their web page, so that a user can, by pressing Y with JAWS, can navigate between the different articles on the page and get their headlines, and then use their standard reading commands to read down through it. And it's not done by anything that the developers have done. It's something that the screen reader is handling in a built-in way. And I've provided a link to a demonstration of that feature, and this was from a couple of years ago. But when I went and tried it out, the results were somewhat different than what's in the video, but the main idea is still there. And one of the nice things about Smart Glance is it can be adjusted to become more aggressive or less aggressive, depending on your user's preferences. On the Mac, this is where I kind of first started thinking about this. Is on the Mac they have something very similar called Window Spots, and one of the interesting things about the way that screen reader works, because it's built in, is you can actually create window spots within applications as well. So it's got kind of a different navigational structure where you interact with different windows and elements on the page, and the um, window spots can be created to bring a user directly to them. So just one of the things I was thinking about, like I said, especially when I was reviewing documentation, accessibility documentation for different vendors of different products, is sometimes that they would mark that they had 1.3.1 was, met the product met the criteria. Well, that's great, but it also an accompanying website or our own website also meets that criteria, but in a completely different way, right? So this is sort of the way that screen readers are kind of mitigating that problem. At this point, I'm going to take just about a minute to go ahead and unmute my notifications, and feel free at this time to make any comments or ask questions about how this is working. Hi, Ashley. JAWS is a Windows application, so it pretty much just runs on Windows. Uh, Deborah, why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Um, yeah, like again, I'm an economist and that means I use a lot of graphs. So does it just, okay, so if I have a graph in a document, does it, these readers, they just read the alt text to the student? Is that how that works?
Um, so actually hold your question, because we're actually going to talk about that exact problem in not the next segment, but the segment
Oh,
after.
okay,
Um,
excellent.
because
I'm
that's
not
a
a
really,
plant.
yeah, that's a really, really, really good question. Um, so Mac uses voiceover, and go ahead and check out the window spots feature. That's sort of the equivalent to what I was describing with Smart Glance. And to step ahead one question, I don't know of any other operating systems that have a similar feature right now, although I can surmise that the next step in the way this is going to evolve is through analyzing your documents with some more of a large language model type solution. So I'm gonna go ahead and press Alt Windows S and unmute my notifications for right now, but we'll be back in just a few seconds or a few minutes. All right, Lauren. So we're on slide 14. I took um, kind of some thinking about, and this is the area of the presentation that was actually the most exciting for me to put together, because kind of using the scientific method, I thought one thing going into it, made a little hypothesis for myself, and came out on the other side of it, so opposite of what I thought going in. So this is something that was very neat for me to think about. So what I did is I took Dragon version 15, which is the version that I had handy. Unfortunately, it was the home edition, so some of the testing got a little thwarted about using a digital voice recorder to make my transcriptions, versus things like Otter or Microsoft 365 built-in speech recognition engines. So I didn't mention at the start, because I got sidetracked by being unable to share my presentation with you. So I forgot to mention I was an assistive technology specialist at Pasadena City College for about 12 years. And in that time, I probably trained more, hundreds of students to use Dragon. And I used Dragon myself. I used Dragon Legal when I was in graduate school, and I've used Dragon naturally speaking ever since. So I thought that I might have a little bit of bias towards it because I was so familiar with its use. And that may still be the case. So what I say at the end of this segment, please take that for what it is. Um, Dragon Naturally Speaking is a program that it runs on Windows computers, and it used to run on Macintosh computers, but now it doesn't. Um, it, it's a program that allows you to control the computer through an overlay, as well as issuing voice commands. And in that sense, it's actually quite a bit more similar to using a screen reader than one first might think. Um, uh, as I mentioned before, you can transcribe recordings after the fact using a digital voice recorder like the one I have here. Um, I accidentally had to upgrade my Dragon to prepare for this presentation, and it removed that feature from my version. So I do have quite a bit of experience with that, but I won't be able to demonstrate that today. Another kind of point I wanted to make is some folks think that almost any voice recorder or headset will work with Dragon, but I have a very inexpensive Android device here, and I don't think that you can use it, even though it does have a microphone built in. It won't accept those audio files. So I actually read a blog post recently, and when I went back to go look for it to cite it for today, I couldn't find it, but that's okay. The point that was being made is maybe Dragon is the first AI assistive technology, and I don't really agree with that, but I do think that what sets Dragon apart from any of the other dictation tools that are out there is that it relies on context to get things right. So it's much more important to speak in complete sentences and as naturally as possible. It's aptly named Dragon Naturally Speaking versus something like Dragon Dictate, which from the past. Anyways, so I do think that in that sense, maybe it's more of kind of a machine learning thing, not necessarily, AI that we think of in 2023 and 2024. A couple of examples. You can say correct that, right, and select text and correct it, and it will learn and not make the same mistake twice in most circumstances. Same thing. It actually, you can say spell that, and you can spell out words and phrases, especially proper names, or definitely with last names that are hard to pronounce, right? And you can select text and make changes and highlight, bold, apply styles, things like that. And those are all things that none of the other programs that are more dictation based can handle. User recorder. So this actually applies to my experiment that I did with all three of these programs. Sometimes for folks who experience difficulties related to writing, are much better off dictating away from the computer, uh, so that they're not looking at what they're typing at the same time, things like that. And you can take a digital recorder and copy the audio file of the dictation off of it, and have it transcribed in all three of these programs.
Alex, we have a raised hand. Did you want to wait to the question break, or did you want to address it now?
I think let's go ahead and wait till the question break. It's in about, I don't know, 3 slides, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome.
So the second kind of program, many of us are familiar with Otter. Otter is sort of a transcription program. It allows for some speaker identification after the fact, one of its better features, as well as some note-taking tools within the interface once the file is transcribed. I took a very short audio recording and made a transcript of it. And this is what it came up with. And notice how it transcribed the punctuation. That's because it's not smart, right? It doesn't do any of the context recognition. It's a transcription program by nature. The second kind of program that I looked at was Microsoft Office 365. And I did like that it gave me a little bit more control over the transcription after the fact. It gave me some settings that I could choose. Text and speakers, text and timestamps, probably pretty good for making caption files. And then the final one is all of those text to speakers and transcripts. Here's what it did, though. It sometimes picked up punctuation, right? A little bit different than Otter, but not. It didn't put it in the correct places necessarily, did it? So oh, and I should say that I just used the text feature to make this transcription. I did go back and test it with text and speakers, and I could use find and replace to fill in speaker names and things like that. It was kind of a boring conversation, though, because it was just me and my screen reader talking back and forth, and it didn't do a very good job of the screen reader. But again, I was using a digital recorder 2 inches from my mouth versus the screen reader, which was about a foot away. So just kind of some comparison thoughts. I thought that Dragon, going into the presentation, I thought that Dragon was old school technology and wasn't really advisable to be used in many circumstances. I kind of changed my mind on that, and one of the reasons is when I set up my brand new Dragon 15, many of the setup steps that took place in the past are gone now. I didn't have to read any text or anything like that to do the dictation tests for today's presentation. There are models for improving recognition. I didn't run any of those for this test either. And I found it to be the most accurate of the three that I looked at. The second thing I would say is the advantage of being able to format your text if you're speaking into a recorder versus just creating a transcript was a bigger time saver than it might than you think. Going back and correcting the transcription errors in the other two programs took time, and personally, I'm pretty good at recognizing mistakes like that. But if I were a user who struggled with a different reading, managed a different reading disability or a different writing disability, just even identifying those errors would be difficult. So the context is king lesson really comes in handy in knowing the difference between ice cream and things like that. And at this point, Lauren, we're going to go to slide 26, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute my notifications so I can hear you all again. And why don't we answer the raised hand first, Lauren?
Hey, Alex. It's Suzanne. How you doing? Great presentation. Lots of helpful information. I've been doing a lot of research with text-to-speech apps and browsers and things like that. And first question is, have you tried Ava? And what do you think of that if you have?
As a text-to-speech engine, is that what from?
Yes.
I think it's an Ivana voice.
It's kind of like trying to be Otter, essentially.
Okay, maybe I am not familiar with Ava.
Yeah, it's okay. And I was going to ask, we've been using Otter Business, which is, we've tried, the free, and then of course Otter Pro, and then we tried Otter Business, and we find it really, really accurate, like with the punctuation about 96%, and shocking. And really the students, after asking about these other options and what they would prefer, and of course, this is just deaf, hard of hearing students, but also students with physical disabilities who can't take notes themselves. I find it really useful for them. And have you tried the business version? Because they prefer it. They really do.
I don't remember what my license of Otter is called, but it's the most inexpensive one.
Yeah, yeah, there's a big difference. And I'll tell you, I was shocked. But yeah, of course, for $10 a month versus free, definitely a big difference.
It
Great.
would surprise me that their speech recognition engine is different in the different versions, but I'd be curious to know more about that. I don't know.
Yeah, I tested it and it really did seem to have a different level of comprehension. And it seemed to understand the context better, but it could be in my imagination. It's only been about 3 months. But anyway, the deaf hardest hearing students don't want to use anything else. They're all unanimously, they will use Otter and pay for it versus changing for free.
Well, and that's where I said maybe my bias is kicking in a little bit, because I'm much more familiar with Dragon at the beginning of this segment, because I think that might be a part of it too.
Yeah, being screen reader user is a completely different application. You're going to be so much more savvy with just, using the interface of your computer than a deaf hard of hearing student might be. So that makes sense. Okay. That was pretty much all I had to ask for now, or else I don't want to take up the whole conversation. Thank you.
I don't know much about Video Premiere for capturing dictation. Just scrolling through the chat messages before I go and mute again. Yeah, text to speech. There was a segment of the presentation today around text to speech that I scrapped last minute. We'll talk a little bit more about it if there's time, though. I'm happy to. Demos or things like that, please contact me and send an email, and we can happily set up a time on a Zoom call to do that. That's I'm going to go ahead and press Alt Windows S again and switch back to the presentation, and we're going to cover recognizing images. So Lauren, just so you so we're on the same page, I'm on slide number 27 now. So remember at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about what a developer reads when they're looking at, or content contributor in this case, most likely, looks at when they're looking at our rules for creating accessible web content. All non-text content must have an equivalent text equivalent. Okay, what does that really mean? It means apply alt text, right, on your images. But what's happening, and what the trend really has been, is that assistive technology is taking over that role, and is really using some of the large language models to create alternative text. And I already can hear the question, and so I'm going to put a stop to it right here. Does this mean we don't have to create alternative text? No, that's not what this means. But what it does mean is that maybe we need to think a little bit more strategically about how we create our alternative text, because there are some advantages to using large language models to query images to get the information that they need. Be My AI. This is there's lots of different assistive technology tools that can do this. JAWS has a built-in feature called Picture Smart. Apple has a built-in feature that does this, but only if you've got the screen reader enabled. So you've got to already be using a screen reader to navigate around to get it to work. There are plugins for using NVDA with image description services. But that involves a lot of overhead and just basic knowledge of those platforms before you can even get into trying image descriptions. So what I'm going to recommend is that if you are on a Windows computer and you'd like to give this a try, the Be My Eyes Be My AI app is available in the Windows Store, and I checked. It is also available on the web. So if your IT department doesn't let you allow things from the store, you're still able to install it to your desktop and give AI image descriptions a try that way. Be My AI actually has 4 functions. One is describe the screen, right? So you can press a hotkey and it'll describe the screen. And one thing I was hoping to test with it, it was just released last week, so is whether or not it'll describe slides from somebody else's presentation in real time. There is other programs built into JAWS that will do that to some degree. So I assume that it works with Be My Eyes as well. You can describe images that you've saved to your computer, right? So actually in preparing for the presentation, I grabbed a few images and off the internet and downloaded them and had the Be My AI describe them using from within my file system here. Same thing, online images works pretty much the same way. And then the 4th option is that it'll you can take a picture with your built-in camera on your laptop, and it will tell you if you're centered, what the lighting conditions are, and things like that. One kind of caveat to that is that it'll only work with the built-in camera, not your default camera. So just kind of be aware of that if you're testing it out and it's not working. So I mentioned earlier that I spent about 12 years at Pasadena City College, and I don't have any idea what this image looks like. That's not really the point of this presentation today, right? But it was in the Creative Commons, and it said that it was an image of the reflecting pools in front of the C building at the Pasadena City College campus, or something like that. I don't remember.
It is.
And great. Your automatic description, all it really says is that well, I got the information that I just told you right now from the caption on the original image. The automatic description built into Microsoft just says a body of water in front of a building or something like that. Here is the description from Be My AI.
You want me to read it, Alex?
It's quite lengthy. If someone wants to read it out loud, go ahead. I'm not going to read it, but I guess let me give you kind of the highlights, right? It talks about the modern building in the foreground with the pool and the small building off to the side and the big building in the background. Now, I kind of know what this is. I think it's the C building in the background, the library in the left, and things like that. Okay. But look how it gives me enough information that I can then go back and query that image. That's the important part about this. I didn't really know what to ask, so I just asked, describe the building, the centered building, which I assumed was the C building in the image. And here, and it responded, and it gave me much more information about the appearance of the C building on our campus. And you see, we can engage in a much longer conversation, and I could really narrow it down to anything that I wanted in that image, right? Now, there was earlier a question about graphs and some financial statistical data. I think that this is where there is no way that we can describe those in enough detail as a third party user of the technology, to make sure that the alternate text captures everything that may be asked by on an exam, for example. But what we can do in the alternative text is provide enough context so that the end user can query the image to get the information they need. For example, what was the hottest day in January, or what was the tallest building in this image, or whatever, and get the information that way. So that's where I was going, and I was so excited that you asked that question, because I think that this is going to be revolutionary. Now, I would caution that it is not 100% reliable, right? It's a large language model. It's not actually smart, but the alt text can sort of guide the query in a way to limit it to that specific image. So in some ways, I think that this is more accurate than describing random things on the web, right? Because you're giving it its corpus of knowledge, its body of knowledge. You're giving the AI that body of knowledge directly there. So I went back and said, this is the C building on the Pasadena City campus, for example, and then it gave me much more information about the history of it and things like that. And so it really depends on the body of knowledge that you give your language model when you're looking to describe images. Questions, thoughts, things like that. I'm going to switch back over and unmute my notifications now.
We have a hand, Alex, and then a couple of questions in the chat.
Let's go with the hand first while I get the chat set up here.
Is that me? I'm Deborah. Okay.
Yes, Deborah.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm the one who asked about the images, first of all. So do you recommend getting my alt text from an AI? And do you think this Be My AI is better than the others? And do I have to buy that?
Actually, the other way around. I think that you should create your alternative text, but do it in such a way that an AI can be queried for more information afterward. So give the end user enough information so that they know to ask the right questions.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to, I've been told that it shouldn't be too long though. So just try to, just work with making it concise, but giving enough information that you can ask more if you need to. And what does it mean to query the image, by the way? What do you mean by that?
So when you get a description of the image from the product that's built into JAWS or the Be My AI, there's one other product whose name is escaping me, of course, at the moment, but the user can go back and ask questions about the image description and get more information. And that's where I think the power of this solution really lies. It doesn't really lie in the initial description, which you should be providing anyways.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
To answer your second
Okay.
question, I didn't do a comparison between the three tools for recognizing images. So I don't have a good answer for you. I would say that they are different. Some of them tend to be a little bit more verbose than others. So I do notice that there is a difference. I just don't have good information about what those differences are.
Here we have another hand, Alex.
Let's go with the hand.
Hi, Alex. This is Natasha. I have a question for you in regards to the use of assistive technology. Based on your presentation, you are a Windows native user, hence using assistive technology that is accustomed to Windows. Have you had a chance to try the voiceover and sort of contrast and compare the ease of use of both tools on Mac versus Windows? And then I'll follow up with another question after I hear what you have to say about that.
So I did support Macs in our Assistive Technology Center at Pasadena City College, and I've also used Macintosh computers in a personal capacity as well. I've also used Chromebooks, and I don't think it's fair to make a comparison between them because they're all very, very, very different in how they operate. Is the only way I can answer that question, I think.
Got it. I think I was going more with a direction of that, let's say NVDA will interpret specific punctuation signs in one fashion where VoiceOver may read that in a different fashion. Hence, two sets of users will have a different experience. And I'm asking this from a perspective of being a Mac user and testing everything with VoiceOver. And therefore relying on that particular input, where when someone comes across the content I'm designing with NVDA, their experience may not be a parallel of the one who is accessing that content with NVDA or Mac or JAWS or anything like that.
Your experience is exactly very insightful and exactly correct. Different users are going to have different experiences based on their technology skills and what's available to them, but also to what their technology is.
Got it. Thank you.
Lauren, I've got 2 minutes and I'm just now looking at the chat. I'm so sorry.
No problem. There's a couple. Yeah, there are a couple in the chat. Some have been answered with others.
Is there any chance you could maybe like summarize them or get, can I answer multiple at one time?
Matthew asks, have you tested CNAI app from Microsoft, which is similar to Be My
That's
AI?
actually my favorite, Matthew, but it's
Okay.
only on mobile.
Okay, and then there was a question that just popped up. We go down a little bit because we have a very active chat, which is really awesome. Jay
Don's
Riley,
absolutely correct, by the way. It works great on Mac device or Mac software, but maybe not otherwise.
Jay Riley asks, so would we do simple alt text like a tall gray building with modern windows and green lawn? Then if the user wants more info, they will use the AI to describe the image in more detail.
That's a little bit what I'm suggesting. But also, remember that alt text is about communication, right? So what is the information that the image is trying to communicate is the question that you need to answer there. Real quick, we were going to have a bit more presentation about text-to-speech and alternative communication. That we're going to have to hold off for another time. I had a friend who was going to demonstrate speaking, who had lost their voice and was using their brothers through 11 Labs to create for their AAC. But there was a health scare and he wasn't able to be here today. But as it turns out, it's 11:50 now and we would not have had time. So please email us at accessibility@ccctechcenter.org with any kind of follow-up questions, and the slides will be available and things like that after as well. Thank you very much, and I'll see you all this afternoon.